Hello friends, this is another unusual video of me talking to the camera. Today I wanted to discuss with you guys something that nobody prompted me to discuss, which is whether people can really measure body fat. And I have a strong opinion on this, but let me tell you first how I came up to this subject. I've recently been watching quite a few videos from Greg Doucette, as you guys may know from my recent review of his cookbook. The reason why I've been watching these videos is because I've been trying to understand how to make a YouTube channel larger. And the main reason I've been trying to do that is because, as my people who follow the channel frequently may notice, I've originally planned my Live Long podcast to be about half entertainment, and then about half of it I plan to interview, and when I say entertainment, to interview interesting people from all kinds of walks of life, not just in athletics or in PEDs or in longevity or anything like that, about their own lives. And then the other half I plan to interview academics, because I read a lot of academic papers and a lot of them are about molecules or subjects that are just becoming understood, and academics of course have to be very cautious with what they say in a paper to be able to get it published. And so I originally thought to name the podcast The Speculator, because I wanted to get people to speculate on things that we could use for ourselves to improve our health, longevity, well-being, cognitive performance, and so on. But unfortunately, this plan basically with my podcast has not been going well because my channel is so small that I can't attract any academics to the channel, like at all. I've emailed, I gave up. I emailed like 20, 25 academics, something like that. And I got, some of them were corresponding with me until I asked about the podcast, and then they stop. So it's been both embarrassing and frustrating. So I've been trying to learn, like, how can I make the channel grow further? And of course, I've learned quite a few things, to be honest, so far. One of the things, I've been looking at Greg Doucette, but even yesterday I was watching some, because I'm fasting right now, I can't, even reading is difficult, so I've been trying to watch some stuff on YouTube to learn more about this. And I was watching this guy called Nicocado Avocado, who's a mukbang guy, but he's actually very informative. Like, it's interesting to see what people want to watch. Nonetheless, so I've learned a few things, by the way. One of the things is that people want to be entertained, but they get entertained by interesting things that you wouldn't think are entertaining. And that they get entertained by characters, like unusual characters. So this is, now I understand why Greg Doucette is screaming a lot and has this certain way that he talks, and he repeats certain phrases like better than last time or more than last time or stuff like that. And I realize that this works. Now, I have a little bit of difficulty not being myself. It feels inauthentic, but I may have to try to do some of this stuff. Oh, also now I realize why he reviews other channels so much. Originally I was thinking not just him, but people who are doing that. Like, there was a guy called Swole Normus. He really frustrated me because all his videos are about other channels, they're on the title, but then he doesn't actually talk about them in the video. So I thought this was like a very shameless way to get clicks from people who are trying to get clicks on the other people. But it turns out that's how YouTube works. You have a caricature, like Jason Blaha used to have this hat thing. I never understood what the hat was about. Or he had like this toy also in the beginning, years ago. So you have like a caricature, and then you review people, and otherwise your channel does not grow. It's like as simple as that. I don't know how other channels grow. So maybe with marketing, paid marketing or something like that, but they don't seem to grow otherwise. Anyway, this is a bit off topic. The point is that, let me get to this final point. So I was always wondering how Greg screams so much in his videos, because it seems tiring to do that, especially because if you see him interact normally, he seems quite normal. It's just even in his old videos. But now he's able to scream for a full 20 minutes. And then I realized he said in one of his videos that he's a narcoleptic. See, narcoleptics, this is very interesting. This is not like saying you have ADHD, which I'm diagnosed with ADHD. It's not a real disorder. It's a very, a very broad. What I mean by it's not a real disorder is someone can have less attention, but it's not a disorder that has a unifying source, a cause. It's not a unified cause. It could be tons of things. It could be, I've looked into the research a lot. So, anyway, I was diagnosed with that since I was a child. My brother was. Everybody was, but narcolepsy is a whole different thing, because with ADHD often they give you stimulants, but they have different kinds of stimulants for ADHD, but some of them are amphetamines. But narcolepsy is very extreme. So narcolepsy, by the way, for you guys that don't know, is someone that's just sitting there completely awake and suddenly goes into full REM sleep, directly into REM. Normally when anyone sleeps, they go from non-REM, they go from stage 1 non-REM to either stage 3 or 4, depending on which metrics you're using. Then they go to REM sleep. Like it takes an hour to go to REM sleep. These guys are sitting talking to you, and all of a sudden they fall into REM sleep. The only thing that they can do with these guys is to give them stimulants. And the thing is, they can't give them light stimulants because they have to stop. Like they give them strong stimulants. So for example, I have a friend who's a narcoleptic. He's prescribed 60 milligrams of Adderall a day, which is almost the amount that an amphetamine addict or a methamphetamine addict would be taking. Not quite, because those guys take grams. But so for example, I have ADHD. If I ever take Adderall, which sometimes I take up to, no, I don't usually take Adderall. I usually take Dexedrine. But if I take it, sometimes I take up to four days a week. Sometimes I don't take it for a month or many weeks in a row. But I take 5 milligrams. So just for comparison, this guy's taking 60 to stay awake. Now, when you are awake and you're not actually falling asleep, you're not sleeping then. So you're on this, I'm not saying he's on this, but my friend is on 60 milligrams when he's awake. But it prevents him from falling asleep. But when he's awake, he's also on 60 milligrams of Adderall, just like I would be. So it's pretty interesting to speculate what Greg might be taking. I originally thought it was coffee, but coffee can't keep a narcoleptic awake. So it could be something like modafinil or some kind of amphetamine, or maybe there are other stimulatory drugs. But anyway, that makes a lot of sense. Now this was a bit off topic, but let's get into what I was trying to talk about. So first of all, I've written some notes so I don't forget, because this is an interesting subject. So I never thought people would genuinely argue about this, but I see how many videos Greg makes about people saying that they are misrepresenting their body fat and that only his eyes can judge what body fat is. Originally, I thought he was joking. Then I started to realize that this guy genuinely believes that he knows what the body fat percentages of people are. So I'm going to explain to you now why he's wrong and why everybody else is also wrong, and also why it doesn't really matter, right? So, first of all, visceral and subcutaneous fat. Now, you guys may not think that there's a lot of visceral fat in people. There is, and it matters. It affects, especially when you're at a lower body fat level. You see a lot of bodybuilders with bulging abdomens, and they have very little subcutaneous body fat. Those bulging abdomens, I have a strong impression, although obviously I have no evidence, but I'm almost completely certain they have a lot of what's called visceral fat. Visceral fat can be intra-organ or inter-organ. So it can be inside your organs, so for example in your liver, between your liver cells, and even inside your liver cells, you can get fat somehow stuck in between them. You can also get fat between the organs. So outside the liver, there could be fat between the next organ. You can have fat on your pancreas. You can have fat around your intestines. You can have fat all other kinds of places inside your abdomen, right? You can even have fat in your muscles. That's even something I didn't write down here, which is, that's another complicating factor. So you can have fat inside your muscles. And the fat that you have inside your muscles cannot be, anyway, so I won't get into that one. But you see how complicated it is. But let's keep ourselves with visceral fat for a moment for the sake of argument. So, first of all, I made a video, I should probably link it here, in which I discussed liver steatosis and how to avoid liver steatosis, which is basically the progression of NAFLD. You get NAFLD, then you get steatosis, which is deposition of fiber, think of it like collagen in your liver, and then eventually you get cirrhosis, which is scarring. This happens from when people drink alcohol. This happens also when people eat a lot of sugar or they're obese. It's one kind of liver disease. If you watch my interview with Dean St. Mart, we discussed 3 kinds of liver disease I talked about. One is cholestasis, which happens a lot to pregnant women, where they have problem with their bile. Another one is this progression I just described. And another one, of course, is liver cancers or tumors, okay, in general. So when this happens, so in that video that I just linked, check out that video. I have a citation there, I believe. But basically, you cannot find out if somebody has a fatty liver by a DEXA scan. Sorry friends, my battery ran out. I've been recording videos all morning. Well, not all morning, but for quite a while. So anyway, let me continue where I left off. So basically there was this paper in the video I cited a little while ago. And in that paper, you'll find out that not only they don't discuss DEXA scans, but there's no question that DEXA scans can't pick up on a fatty liver very well. They do estimate visceral fat, but it's extremely inaccurate. CAT scans, which involve radiation, can't do it very well. fMRI scans are the best tool we have but they're also very inaccurate to the degree that somebody can have a seriously fatty liver, and he goes and does an fMRI, and whatever kind of doctor he's dealing with, many doctors are interested in fatty liver disease, but whatever kind of doctor he's dealing with will not know if they have a fatty liver. So when it's a serious case, they do what's called a liver biopsy. They actually they do a little surgery, cut out a bit of the liver, and examine it under a microscope to decide if the person has a fatty liver. You may think that I'm nitpicking, but I'm just trying to give you one example from the research that I've read in my lifetime that shows that there's almost no way for us to tell if one organ is fat. Forget about the fat between the organs, inside all the other organs, and how much all of this fat accumulates together. And if you've ever seen someone butcher an animal, of course we are not, it's not the same thing, but you'll see there's a lot of fat in between those organs. So the first thing is that we can't really estimate visceral fat. Okay, it's very difficult to tell. What I wanted to say within that is, if an fMRI cannot judge the presence of fat in the visceral area or on an organ, how can our eyes? It's not possible. And if a DEXA scan can't, how can our eyes, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is, just so you guys know, there are some ethnicities like South Asians and Far East Asians, mainly South Asians, that have this phenotype that some nephrologists or other endocrinologists call the skinny type 2 diabetic, which is somebody who looks like he's not fat or she's not fat, is skinny, but is a type 2 diabetic and insulin resistance. And almost without question, they have a lot of visceral fat. But you can't tell because they don't have much fat underneath their skins. You just notice by their waist size, it doesn't make sense for how, or they have a little bit of a bulge, either up here or somewhere else, where that would be a fatty liver. Coincidentally, if you've ever seen Greg in some of his other videos where he moves around, you'll notice he has a bulge here, even though he doesn't have much. And this isn't about Greg, I'm just mentioning. That could be visceral fat, for example, that he's not aware of. How do you, by the way, one of the ways that a normal person develops visceral fat, if they never take long periods off eating, and especially if they're eating a lot of carbs, they can diet and lose a lot of subcutaneous fat, but that visceral fat may stay there for a long time, which is, I believe, how, my personal opinion or speculation, how bodybuilders have a lot of their gut. Is a lot of it, and I'm sure a lot of it is different things, fluid, their digestive system, but also most prominently the visceral fat, which particularly, for example, well, anyway, I won't go into too much detail, but the point is, if the CAT scan can't do it, and the fMRI cannot do it, your eyes cannot do it. So you don't know how much visceral fat there is in there. That's number one. Number two, regarding subcutaneous fat. Okay, first of all, people distribute fat in all kinds of manners. So for example, East Asians tend to have well-distributed subcutaneous fat, right? So they don't tend to have as much as, for example, me or some other people. We get fat on our, either I get on my lower back or love handles or somewhere there. I get groups of fat, right? So that's the first thing. People have different distributions of fat in their body subcutaneously. So it's true, you can eyeball and you can look at somebody, turns around, you can see, oh, there's quite a bit of fat under his on his waistline. But how do you know how much that fat weighs? Because that's what you're talking about, right? The percentage of the fat. Can you can really estimate this? Because I don't know how you could estimate it, because you've never, this sounds a little crazy, but you've never seen all someone's fat on a scale and then compared, oh, there was this guy who had it all spread out and this is how much it weighed. Whereas this guy who didn't have it spread out, I took just his, for God's sake, I took just his love handle fat, and it actually surprised me. It weighed 5 pounds, I thought, or it weighed 20 pounds, I thought it didn't. Right? And we know how much fat generally weighs per pound, but you can't estimate how much. You've never done that. Nobody butchers people, so you were not used to looking at fat on a scale and weighing it out. It's a ridiculous concept. So that's one thing. The eyeball is not going to tell you. The second thing is the calipers. Those calipers are meant to measure the maximum of the fat that you could potentially have. And by the way, those things could be manipulated also by skin and various things, but we're not going to get into that. But they measure the maximum, right? You can get a maximum and a minimum, and you can measure different places in the body and make an estimation. But this is a very rough estimation. Anyone who uses their logic will realize that, right? Because it's still not giving you a model. You could use the caliper and literally measure every square centimeter of them, and then use a computer model to model that. But then again, you're not getting at the subcutaneous fat, you're not dealing with the skin, right? So different people have different kinds of skin, different thicknesses of skin, people have loose skin, there's all kinds of things. So I just give you two examples. The subcutaneous, you can't measure it, not with the eyeball, not with the caliper. The visceral fat, you can't measure with anything, right? So definitely your eyeball can't measure that. And then the visceral fat is significant in the total fat. So we get into the final discussion. So my point is this: eyeballing someone's body fat percentage is ridiculous. Well, it's not ridiculous, but arguing about it is ridiculous. Because number one, everyone is wrong. Nobody has the only people who may know this, and they don't, is the people in mortuaries that deal with people's bodies that, or you know, maybe, but doctors and even the mortuary people, morticians, whatever they're called, they don't weigh different amounts of fat or skin someone, take all their subcutaneous fat, weigh that, compare it, and look at different areas and compare it to nobody does that. So nobody knows the weights. They may be able to say, I think that the person who holds, 10 pounds of visceral fat or 15 pounds or whatever, if they literally did a surgery on them and looked at it, but they didn't weigh the fat. So this is out of the question. So when people talk about body fat percentages, this is what I feel like some people are not understanding right now because they're arguing about it a lot. They're talking about it as a means of communication. It's a linguistic thing. You know, one of my favorite philosophers, Ludwig Wittgenstein, always said that there are no philosophical problems, they're just puzzles, linguistic puzzles. This is a linguistic puzzle. None of us actually know how much body fat anyone is, but we use it as a communication measure. So when I say 15%, you mean that the abs show or something. You know what I mean? We have some kind of estimation. Well, it's not meant to be exact. Now, what Greg has been saying is that everybody's estimate, the common estimate, is wrong. It's actually lower than that. So if you say 10%, he says 5%. What's the value in that? If everybody's saying 15% or 10%, what is the value? The value is this. He's arguing about what 1% looks like superficially on the outside. Not visceral fat, but what 1% in his mind may look like when you look at someone. So basically he's arguing that, because if you're saying you're 10% and he says he's been 5%, then he's saying, no, I could still lose more and I wouldn't be at zero. So he's saying that the 5% is actually more than what you think it is. I mean, your percent is more than 10% because I still have more to go and I went to 5%. But the question, Greg, or to anyone else is, how do you know what 1% is? You've never seen 1%. Nobody even claims that somebody, I mean, especially not Greg, nobody claims that anybody was 2%. Suppose if you're using the superficially, not using the visceral fat and all that other crap, like Ronnie Coleman, for example, was saying is a very low body fat. I'm sure Greg doesn't agree with him, but that guy had clearly visceral fat, right? He had a huge waistline and he was very low body fat. Something was going on there. It's not as big anymore. But it doesn't matter. The point is, the question is, when have you seen 1% body fat? You haven't. When have you seen 100% body fat? You haven't. When have you seen 50% body fat? Well, you might have, but you wouldn't know when it was. So how can you actually make a reference range to say, no, it's not 10, it's 5? Well, how do you know when you get to 1? Because nobody's ever gone to 1. So the range people have gone to, or they claim to have gone to, is like 4 to 10 or 15. That's what people are arguing about. You can't estimate it anyway. So there's no point arguing so much. You can't tell. And that's aside from the fact that all of the guys are not considering visceral fat, which is ridiculous. So anyway, this is a little rant. It's probably not that informative. It's more like a rhetorical exercise or a philosophical exercise. But you can imagine just from the visceral fat, you can't know. Visceral fat can't be measured by technologies unless you cut someone open, take out an organ, and then you only know from that organ. Unless you literally took the whole abdomen, scraped off all the fat, you still wouldn't be able to tell how much fat is in the organ, by the way. So this is just ridiculous. But then, superficially, you can't tell because people's fat are in different areas of the body. Then the calipers are not meant to make a full model of the thing. They're meant to be an estimate again. And then finally, most importantly, nobody knows what 1% body fat looks like. And nobody knows what 100 looks like. Nobody actually knows what 10 looks like. And nobody knows what 5 looks like. So you can't really know what 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever. I hope this was helpful for you guys. I hope you agree with me. I think anyone who's listening to this will agree this is all nonsensical. The only important point is that everybody agree on something. So like if 10% looks like the skin is a certain level of thinness, which has nothing to do with percent. It's really just a term to say, you can see my abs, or I don't have big flabs of fat somewhere, or whatever. Then that's a language. That's the language people will use, right? Alright, I hope this was informative. I'll see you guys next time.